Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Culture Report. I'm Antonia Velez. The first phase of President Donald Trump's shaky ceasefire plan for Israel and Hamas held this week, with a pause to the once frequent strikes on Gaza, the partial withdrawal of Israeli troops to determined boundaries, and the return of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. On Monday, Hamas released the last 20 living Israeli hostages and some of the bodies of former hostages in exchange for around 2,000 Palestinian prisoners and detainees freed by Israel. Among the freed detainees are 250 Palestinians who were sentenced for crimes and about 1,700 others who were taken from Gaza and held without charge. The Gaza Health Ministry reports it has also received at least 120 bodies of Palestinians, which, according to forensics teams, showed signs of mistreatment. Israel maintains that it follows international and domestic legal standards for the treatment of prisoners, but the Associated Press spoke with Palestinian medics and activists who say health issues in former detainees who are still alive are also evidence of abuse during their imprisonment. Here's what one doctor had to say.
هذا يدل إنه هذه المرضى تعرضوا لضرب شديد ويدل على مدى العنف. كسور في القفص الصدري هذا يدل على ضربة شديدة أو إصابة شديدة من قبل السجان جيش الاحتلال.
Now, the 20 living Israeli hostages freed by Hamas had been in captivity for 738 days. For those people, there's also a long road of recovery ahead. A psychiatrist in Tel Aviv who will help treat former hostages tells CNN that after tackling urgent medical conditions comes treating any mental health issues that stem from their experiences. This starts with the abrupt change from being in captivity to being in the hospital.
It's a very, very swift and big change to adapt to. And then we're going to look for other symptoms like the PTSD symptoms, post-traumatic stress, if there are trouble sleeping, trouble eating, or other things we've seen before. But I think all of them are struggling. It's not something that is behind them in any way. The end of this war is going to give them some closure. Some of them are waiting for family members, for deceased family members who are waiting to bury them, but this will bring them some closure, and maybe they will begin to start treating themselves and heal.
Israel is also expecting the return of 28 deceased hostages. As of this morning, Hamas has only returned 9 of those bodies. Israel claims one of the bodies it received did not actually belong to a former hostage. In a statement Wednesday, the militant group said it has given Israel the bodies it could access. Much of Gaza is now rubble and debris after the destructive 2-year war. To pressure Hamas's return of deceased hostages, Israel announced it would restrict the influx of aid that was previously agreed upon. This sparked a response from humanitarian groups, including the United Nations humanitarian chief, who pointed to the territory's widespread hunger, disease, and sanitation issues. Although U.S. advisors told CNN the White House does not believe Hamas has violated the ceasefire in its delayed return of hostage remains, President Trump told the agency he would consider allowing Israel to resume fighting if the militant group does not hold up its side of the deal. And Trump's recent comments come despite his confidence in his plan's ability to effectively end the Israel-Hamas war. After the official signing of the first phase, Trump declared peace between the two groups. However, experts in the matter say that key questions must be answered before real peace is in sight. This starts with the rebuilding of the infrastructure destroyed in Gaza and providing Palestinians with food, medicine, and adequate shelter. The issue of ongoing violence also stands. Israel's military reported it opened fire Tuesday at people who crossed the withdrawal line where it partially retreated. Clashes between Hamas and rival groups have also been reported across Gaza. Additionally, Hamas has yet to agree to disarm, which is a crucial portion of Trump's 20-point ceasefire plan. The possibility of an internationally recognized Palestinian statehood, as well as the territory's future leadership, also remain unclear. Now, moving on to some environmental news, a new report says Earth has reached its first climate tipping point, the widespread death of coral reefs. The 160 scientists who created that report say that as oceans reach record high temperatures, 80% of the world's reefs have been affected by the worst mass bleaching event on record. Coral reefs are an essential habitat for marine species. They buffer coastal areas from storms and contribute heavily to the global economy. Scientists say the death of coral reefs is just the first of several potentially irreversible climate tipping points. And another new report, this one by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, says melting sea ice and deforestation are threatening the survival of many species. The IUCN's Red List is the primary list people look at when it comes to understanding whether a species is threatened, endangered, or extinct. The latest Red List includes more than 172,000 species. More than 48,000 of them are threatened with extinction. 3 species of Arctic seals now face extinction because of global warming, and more than half of the world's birds are in decline due to habitat loss. But in one positive note, researchers said the green sea turtle population is rebounding thanks to decades of conservation efforts. Was Monday Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day? Depends on who you ask and where you live. This year, there were 30 states that celebrated Columbus Day and 17 that celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day, according to Pew Research. Some of those recognize both. As part of growing scrutiny over Columbus's treatment of Native people and a movement to recognize the numerous challenges Native communities have faced, Indigenous Peoples Day was first recognized as federal holiday in 2021 on the same day as Columbus Day under Joe Biden. Last week, President Donald Trump issued a proclamation about Columbus Day, saying he wanted to, quote, reclaim the colonizer's legacy, and notably leaving out any mention of Indigenous Peoples Day. In the proclamation, Trump called Christopher Columbus, quote, a true American hero. History professor and former 9 Newser Tim Ryan is joining me now. Thank you so much for making the time, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, Columbus Day was first commemorated in 1892 in response to some anti-Italian rhetoric at the time, right? How might that influence people wanting to, kind of hold on to Columbus Day?
Well, Italians at the time, and this was in direct response to a massacre in New Orleans in 1891, where 11 Italian immigrants were really murdered by a mob, and that was Italian immigrants very much considered themselves to be other, as did a lot of European immigrants, Irish immigrants, Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe who were coming into the United States. And so as years have worn on, many people in the Italian-American community have considered it to be, this is our one day,
right.
And now you've taken that away, and that's hurtful to them. So as we see throughout history, we have the opinions of people and the heritages of people in conflict with one another, but there's also, of course, a tremendous conversation around Columbus and his legacy.
Right, and moving on to that, I think in schools most of us are taught kind of an incomplete, quote unquote, whitewashed version of what Columbus did and
right.
when he got to the quote unquote New World. But I think there's more to be said, right? Because arguably you can't talk about Columbus's history without talking about the plight of Indigenous peoples. Can you kind of speak to that?
So I think there are 2 ways to look at it. One is Columbus as a snapshot, as an individual. He's Italian, but he's sailing for Spain. He's trying to find a shortcut to India. This is why the word Indian comes from Columbus's belief, which he held until his death 14 years after he discovered America. He, of course, didn't discover it. There were lots
right.
of people who said, we already knew it was here.
Right.
And so there's that question about who was he and what kind of person was he, and then there's the what we would say, you take the snapshot and you put it into the photo album, and the photo album is the European colonization of what we now refer to as the Americas, from the Arctic Circle to Tierra del Fuego in Argentina and Chile. All of that landmass there was an effort to claim that on the part of European countries. Columbus, as an example, sailing for Spain, yes, was trying to find a shortcut to India, thought he had found it, thought that's where he had landed.
Right.
But the number one thing that Europeans were looking for in order to pay for exploration was gold.
Gold,
He
of
was
course.
sure it was full of gold. All of the Europeans who came was sure it was right around the corner. And so one of the ugliest pieces of the Columbus legacy was the sort of gold quota that Native peoples were given. You will bring me X amount of gold dust on the following schedule, and if you don't, then they would suffer the consequences of that, limbs removed or worse. And that's an ugly story, and one of many that would follow as Europeans, just wave after wave after wave of explorers and then settlers began to move into the Americas, including the landmass that we now refer to as the United States, which today the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs recognizes 571 separate entities. There were likely many more than that who were eliminated essentially as a result of European colonization. So it's quite easy to see why there was a movement to challenge Columbus Day and to establish Indigenous Peoples Day, because for Indigenous peoples from this giant landmass from north to south, the European colonization it turned their lives upside down, to say the least. It was devastating and remains so today. And yet you also have that in conflict with the pride that Italian Americans feel about, like, this was our one day we had and now you took it away from us.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tim, as someone who teaches history, how important would you say it is to learn about the, so to speak, uglier, more negative, harder to digest aspects of history to fully understand the country we live in?
So I think it's really critical, the kind of history that you described that was common in America, and education for many, many decades was to leave all of the awkward stuff out. We're going to concentrate on the good parts. We're going to concentrate on the land of the free and the home of the brave, and then end of story. And America has got a lot of great historical moments in it. Some very inspiring things, some very things that we should be proud of, and things that we have to wrestle with. And Columbus's story, not just him as an individual, but the entire European colonization of the Americas, is a very complicated story, and also devastating for many peoples. There's a book written by Jared Diamond called Guns, Germs, and Steel, in which he seeks to explain the advantages that the Europeans had. And the germs part of that was that Europeans carried germs from the bubonic plague and other diseases that Native peoples had no immunity to, and it devastated populations, and made it in a strange way much easier for the Europeans to dominate when they arrived, because there were communities that were wiped out or left as a shadow of their former selves. And so I think you have to look at all of that. I think to oversimplify it in any direction is always a problem. It has to be looked at. You also have to look at the fact that without Columbus and without European colonization, this current state of these countries, from Canada to Argentina and Chile, would not exist. It would not exist like this. It would have been a very different story, and so you have to acknowledge that as well. But to sort of gloss over the difficulties that Native peoples experienced as a result of what happened is, to me, crazy and should not be accepted as a baseline. We need to. It's complex, and yes, there are ugly parts, and we should talk about all of it.
Absolutely. Tim Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And something we love to do here on the Culture Report is shout out the people in our community who are doing the work to make it a better, brighter place. We want to give a shout out to Norma Mireles and the Mexican Banda at Power Pedal in Aurora for choosing an atypical venue to share their culture. On a few Sundays every month, a live Mexican band joins cyclists playing both traditional and modern tunes. Norma added the band to share her cultural roots during workouts. And for the musicians, it's also a way to bring people from different backgrounds together.
Hay gente que viene de Colombia, Venezuela, México. Entonces, esto ahora sí que nos une porque las personas también de Colombia les está gustando nuestra música, en este caso el estilo mexicano, ¿verdad? La cultura mexicana les está gustando y se están adaptando también a Aún no, también nosotros nos estamos adaptando a ellos y poco a poco esto va creciendo más.
Our next shout out goes out to Lisa Ridenor. Thanks to her help, the Arapahoe County Jail has a new food pantry for people to use after they're released from custody. It has all sorts of things like peanut butter crackers, cup noodles, and Gatorade. The sheriff's office says that a lot of the time, released inmates are cash-strapped with limited to no support or place to go. Lisa says she was inspired to start the pantry by her daughter, Giselle, who passed away from an overdose at the age of 24. She says she wants her daughter's death to help save other people's lives, and this food pantry is a step to make that happen. We'd love some help to figure out who deserves a shout out next week, whether it's one person or a whole organization. We want to hear about the people who are making a difference in your community. So send us a text at 303-871-1491 and tell us about the folks you think deserve a 9 shout out. And don't be surprised when we reach back out to ask you more about your special people. If you want to see more Culture Report or any of our 9 News content, you can find us on the 9 News Plus app or 9news.com. We'll be right back.